Be me, Alec. Just a regular guy in a regular office job. The company isn't huge, maybe 50 or 60 people in our building. For years, it was the perfect gig. Decent pay, low stress, and the team was solid. Mostly guys in my department, which was fine by me. No drama, no politics. We'd come in, do our work, bust each other's chops a little, and go home. The boss was a reasonable guy who only cared about one thing: results. If the numbers were good, he left us alone. It was a simple, unspoken contract, and it worked. My best work friend was Demir, the main IT guy. Sharp dude, bit of a cynic, but the kind of guy you want on your side when things go wrong. He had this way of seeing through corporate nonsense before anyone else even smelled it coming. Then there was Tate, one of the accountants. Older guy, probably close to retirement. Quietest man I've ever met. He'd been with the company since the beginning, just sat in his corner cubicle and crunched numbers. Barely said 2 words a day, but he was a legend. If you had a problem with an expense report, you went to Tate, not your manager. He'd fix it with a few clicks and a quiet nod. The office had a rhythm. Coffee in the morning, the hum of computers, quiet chatter about sports or a movie someone saw. Fridays were pizza days, a tradition older than I was. The company would order a stack of pizzas, and we'd all just chill in the break room for the last hour of the day. It was a good place. Then, a few months back, we got the email. Our longtime HR lady was retiring. We gave her a nice send-off, cake, and a card, the usual. Nobody really thought about who would replace her. HR was just the place you went to file paperwork. A week later, another email. Introducing our new head of human resources, Sophia. There was a picture attached. She had that very specific severe haircut and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The email was full of buzzwords about how excited she was to cultivate a dynamic and forward-thinking corporate culture. I remember Demir leaning over his monitor and just saying, "Oh no." He was right. Her first week was quiet. She walked around the office with a notepad, observing, not talking to people, just watching. It was like being in a zoo, and she was the anthropologist studying the strange native creatures. Then the changes started, small things at first. The first casualty was Pizza Friday. An email went out on a Thursday afternoon. Moving forward, to promote a healthier and more inclusive workplace, we will be discontinuing the weekly pizza lunch. Instead, we would have a mandatory 30-minute food for thought session in the main conference room. The first session was about understanding unconscious bias in a professional setting. Sophia stood at the front of the room with a PowerPoint presentation. The air was thick with resentment. The smell of leftover pizza from years past haunted the room like a friendly ghost. She talked about how certain workplace traditions could inadvertently exclude people. She never gave any specific examples of who was being excluded by pizza. After that, the break room coffee was replaced. The old, reliable coffee maker that anyone could use was gone. In its place was a complicated machine with a dozen settings and tiny pods. The new coffee was fair trade, organic, single origin, and tasted like dirt. It also cost the company 3 times as much, a fact Tate quietly pointed out to anyone who would listen. Sophia started policing conversations. She'd just appear, materializing in a doorway if she heard a group of us laughing. She'd ask what the joke was, and the question wasn't friendly. It was an interrogation. One time, a few guys were talking about a football game from the weekend. The quarterback had played terribly. One of them said, "Man, he really choked." Sophia, who had been passing by, stopped dead. She came over and informed us that using violent language like choked contributes to a culture of toxic masculinity. The guys just stared at her, dumbfounded. After she left, nobody spoke for 5 minutes. The easy, casual atmosphere of the office was evaporating. It was being replaced by a quiet, cautious paranoia. People started keeping their office doors closed. The casual banter over the cubicle walls died down. Everyone was afraid of saying the wrong thing and getting called into the HR office for a lecture. Demir and I would talk about it over lunch, usually somewhere far away from the office. He told me she was on a power trip, trying to justify her job by creating problems that didn't exist. He said the world is full of people like that, who can't build anything themselves, so they get their satisfaction from tearing things down. I just thought it was miserable. I like my job. I like the people I worked with. Now, I was starting to dread coming into work in the morning. The feeling of walking on eggshells was exhausting. We all just tried to keep our heads down and wait for the storm to pass. We figured eventually she'd run out of things to fix and get bored. We were wrong. It was all just a prelude to her masterpiece, the email that would change everything. It arrived on a Monday morning. The subject line was, Mandatory Policy Update, Email Signature Standardization for Inclusivity. I opened it with a feeling of dread. The email was long, full of corporate speak and self-congratulatory nonsense. It talked about our company's unwavering commitment to diversity and creating a safe space for all identities. I scrolled down to the actual policy part. Effective immediately, all employees are required to include their personal pronouns in their corporate email signature. It gave examples: he/him, she/her, they/them. It stated that this was not optional. Failure to comply would be considered a breach of the new company code of conduct. The final line was the real kicker. This is a simple but powerful way to show respect for your colleagues and to normalize the discussion of gender identity in the workplace. I read it twice. I looked up from my screen. All around the office, I could see the same thing. People staring at their monitors in disbelief. The silence was heavier than ever before. It wasn't about the pronouns themselves. Most of us didn't care what people wanted to be called. It was the forced nature of it. The authoritarian top-down mandate from a woman who had spent the last month making our lives progressively worse. It was an act of control. She was telling us not just how to work, but how to think, how to speak. My phone buzzed. It was Demir on our private chat. "Did you see it?" I replied. "I saw it. This is ridiculous." His next message was, "Meet me by the back door in 5. A few of us gathered outside, in the cold air. Everyone was angry. One of the older salesmen, a guy who had been with the company for 20 years, was fuming. He said he'd never been told what to put in his signature in his entire career. He felt it was a violation of his personal beliefs to be forced to participate in this. Another guy was worried. He asked what would happen if we just didn't do it. We all knew the answer. We'd be called into Sophia's office one by one and disciplined. We'd get a black mark on our record. In this job market, nobody wanted that. There was a feeling of helplessness. We were trapped. We could either submit to this ridiculous rule or risk our jobs. Everyone was just venting, throwing out ideas. Maybe we should all go to the CEO. But we knew that wouldn't work. The CEO would just see it as a bunch of guys complaining about a progressive HR policy. He wouldn't want the headache. He'd back his HR manager. We were stuck. Then Demir, who had been quietly listening, started to smile. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a mischievous, dangerous smile. He pulled out his phone. He said, "Gentlemen, she has made a critical error. She has given us an order, but she hasn't properly defined the terms." He showed us his screen. He had Googled list of pronouns. Not just he, she, and they. There was a massive list. Dozens and dozens of words I'd never seen before. They were called Neo-Pronouns. Things like z/zir/zirs and fey/faer/faers. Demir scrolled down the list. His grin got wider. "She said we must include our pronouns. She wants to normalize them. Well, let's help her." The idea started to sink in. Malicious compliance. We wouldn't break the rule. We would follow it to the letter. We would follow it so perfectly that we would break her. The mood of the group shifted from despair to a kind of giddy excitement. The power was back in our hands. We went back inside, a silent army with a secret mission. Demir was the first to act. He needed to test the waters. He changed his email signature. It now read, Demir, Senior IT Specialist, Z/ZIR. Then he crafted a perfectly normal work email. It was a question for Sophia about some new software licensing for the HR department. A completely legitimate inquiry. He hit send. A few of us who were in on the plan watched our screens, waiting. It felt like an eternity. About 15 minutes later, the reply came. We saw Demir lean back in his chair and let out a quiet laugh of triumph. He forwarded the email to our private chat. It was from Sophia. She had answered his question, and she had used his new pronouns. "Demir, thank you for reaching out. I will have to check with Zir on the budget for the new software. I will let you know what Z says." The tone of her email was smug. She thought her policy was a success. She thought Demir was one of the good ones, an ally who had embraced her vision. She had no idea she had just armed her own enemy. Demir sent a single message to the group chat. "Green light, let's get inclusive." It was my turn. I didn't want to just copy Demir. I wanted something that captured the absurdity of the situation. I thought about it for a minute. I am me, I am Alec, but in this new corporate reality, I felt like nothing. A ghost in the machine. A void. That was it. I updated my signature. Alec, project coordinator, vo/void. Then the floodgates opened. It spread through the office like a silent, hilarious wildfire. We used a secure chat to coordinate, sharing ideas. The guy in marketing who was a huge foodie changed his to burger/burger self. One of the junior programmers, a quiet kid who loved sci-fi, became beep/boop. The top salesman, a guy with a bit of an ego, declared his pronouns to be His Majesty/His Majesties. Each new signature was a small act of defiance. It was beautiful. The atmosphere in the office transformed again. The fear was gone. In its place was a simmering, barely contained amusement. People would walk past each other's desks, glance at a monitor, and have to hurry away to keep from laughing out loud. We were a united front, bound by a shared, ridiculous secret. Sophia, for the first day or two, didn't seem to notice the scale of it. She probably saw Demir's and mine and thought it was just a few enthusiastic early adopters. She was a victim of her own ideology. She couldn't question someone's chosen pronouns without looking like a hypocrite. To challenge us would be to admit that some identities were less valid than others, which went against her entire platform. She had built her own prison, and we were just handing her the keys. The first sign that she was starting to understand came on Wednesday. She needed to send out a memo about an upcoming fire drill. It was a simple, all-staff email. But now she had a problem. Her own rule mandated respect for our chosen pronouns. A simple sentence like, "He needs to check the fire extinguishers," became a minefield. Who was he? Was it Steve, he/him, or was it someone else? She couldn't just use our names because the whole point of her policy was to normalize pronoun usage. She was trapped. We waited all morning for that email. When it finally came, it was a masterpiece of confusing, convoluted language. It was addressed to everyone. It contained sentences like, "I need to confirm with His Majesty that His Majesty's team in the sales department is aware of the drill," and "Please ensure that Burger has everything Burger Self needs to inform the marketing team." It also mentioned, "I have asked Vo to send Void Self a copy of the new evacuation plan." The email was almost impossible to read. It was professional communication filtered through the lens of utter nonsense. That's when we knew we had her. She was being forced to participate in the chaos she had created. Her attempt to control our language had resulted in the complete breakdown of clear communication. It was poetic. Productivity for the rest of the day dropped to zero. Not because we weren't working, but because we were all trying to decipher her memo and then responding to it in kind. Emails flew back and forth. Replying to Sophia, "Just wanted to let you know that Beep has informed Boop of the fire drill procedures. Can His Majesty confirm if this applies to His Majesty's clients who may be in the building?" Her inbox must have been a nightmare. Every single email was a fresh hell, a new combination of ridiculous words she was obligated to read and respect. She stayed in her office for the rest of the day with the door closed. We could see her through the glass wall, just sitting at her desk, staring at her screen. Her expression was no longer smug. It was a mixture of fury and confusion. The revolution was in full swing, but the most surprising soldier had yet to join the fight, and his entry would be the moment we knew we were going to win. The next morning, things escalated. More people had joined overnight. The accounting department, which was usually a fortress of conservative seriousness, had cracked. We saw emails with pronouns like $/bills and debit/credit, but Tate, the silent pillar of the office, still had a standard signature, name, title, nothing else. We figured he was just staying out of it. He was old school, not the type for these kinds of games. Around mid-morning, I had to take some paperwork to him. I walked over to his quiet corner. He was staring at his screen, not doing any work, just thinking. I put the papers on his desk. He nodded at me, still silent. As I walked away, I saw him start typing. A few minutes later, an email from Tate appeared in my inbox. It was sent to the entire accounting department, copying Sophia. The subject was query regarding Q3 expense reports. The body of the email was a standard dry accounting question. But the signature was perfect. It read, Tate, Senior Accountant, honk honks. The office erupted in silent, keyboard-muffled laughter. Tate, quiet, serious, no-nonsense Tate, had declared his pronouns to be honk/honks. It was a checkmate. If even Tate was in on it, then her policy had zero supporters. It showed that this wasn't just a few young troublemakers. It was everyone. It was a complete and total rejection of her authority, disguised as perfect compliance. I looked over at Sophia's office. She was standing up now, looking out at the rest of us. She could feel it, the unity, the shared joke that she was the punchline of. Her face was pale. She knew she had lost control. And that was only the first week. We had no idea how much further it was all about to go. The day Tate became honk/honks was the day the war was unofficially won. It was one thing for the younger guys like me and Demir to pull something like this. We could be written off as immature or just being difficult. But Tate was untouchable. He was the institutional memory of the company. He was quiet, diligent, and universally respected. His participation wasn't a joke. It was a judgment. It was the quietest, most dignified middle finger I have ever seen. Sophia must have felt it too. She didn't come out of her office for the rest of the day. The next morning, a new email was waiting for us. Subject: urgent and mandatory meeting, reaffirming our commitment to respectful communication. It was scheduled for that afternoon in the main conference room. The entire company was required to attend. We all knew what it was. This was her attempt to regain control. We filed into the conference room that afternoon. The mood was tense, but not in the way she probably hoped. It was like a classroom full of students who had successfully pranked their teacher, waiting to see how she would try to punish them without admitting she'd been outsmarted. Sophia stood at the front, next to a whiteboard. She had a stack of pamphlets in her hand. She started by saying she was disappointed in the way some employees had chosen to engage with the new email policy. She spoke about how the policy was intended to create an environment of psychological safety. Then she made her mistake. She said, "I think there's some confusion about the purpose of sharing pronouns, so I want to open the floor to a constructive dialogue." There was a long silence. Then, from the back of the room, Demir raised his hand. Sophia looked surprised. She probably expected him, as Z/Zir, to be her star pupil. She called on him with a hopeful smile. Demir stood up. He had a perfectly straight face. He said, "Thank you, Sophia. I just want to say that I, for one, really appreciate this policy. For the first time, I feel seen. I'm just wondering if the company is prepared to offer us further support." Sophia's smile widened. "Of course." "What kind of support did you have in mind?" "Well," Demir said, his voice full of fake sincerity, "some of us who identify with less common pronouns are facing a lot of questions from our colleagues. It can be emotionally taxing to have to explain your identity over and over. Perhaps HR could develop some educational materials for us." It was a masterstroke. He was using her own language against her. He was framing our ridiculousness as a cry for more of her help. Sophia was completely taken in. "That's an excellent suggestion, Demir," she said, beaming. "I will absolutely start working on a resource guide." Then another hand went up. It was the salesman, His Majesty. He stood up and said, "On that note, I'm concerned about external communications. When His Majesty emails a new client, His Majesty's pronouns can sometimes cause confusion. Is there a company-wide script we can use to explain our identities to people outside the organization?" Sophia's eyes lit up. She was eating it up. She was no longer scolding us. She was leading a movement. She started taking notes on the whiteboard. "Fantastic point. We need to standardize our external messaging to ensure our partners and clients respect our inclusive values." The meeting had completely derailed from its original purpose. She thought she was winning us over. In reality, we were just giving her more rope. We spent the next hour workshopping ideas for how Sophia could make the company even more absurdly compliant with her own terrible policy. The meeting ended with her thanking us all for our courage and vulnerability. She promised that new, more detailed guidelines were coming soon. We walked out of that room as a disciplined, unified force of chaos. For the next week, the office was a surrealist play. Sophia, true to her word, was busy creating pamphlets. In the meantime, communication had completely broken down. A simple request could get lost in a sea of pronouns. I remember seeing an email chain trying to organize a simple project meeting. It was 20 emails long because nobody could figure out who was being referred to. Berger needs to book the room, but only after Beep confirms Boop's availability, and please check if His Majesty will be gracing us with His Majesty's presence. It was madness, but the real trouble started, as His Majesty had predicted, with outside clients. The sales team had to communicate with customers all day, every day. Their signatures were now a liability. We heard a story about a major client, an older guy from a very traditional industry, who received an email from one of our top salesmen. The email itself was normal, but the signature, Faye/Fayer, threw him for a loop. He apparently called our main office line, furious. He thought our company had been hacked, or that we were sending him some kind of weird political spam. He demanded to speak to the CEO. That was the first tremor. Sophia's solution to this was to draft the standardized external message we had baited her into creating. She sent out a new memo with a pre-written paragraph that we were supposed to paste into our first email with any new client. The paragraph was a long, jargon-filled explanation of the company's commitment to gender identity, and it included a link to a website that explained what Neo-Pronouns were. It was basically a political manifesto we were now required to send to potential customers. The sales team was in open revolt. They knew this would kill their deals. They went to their own manager, who then went to the CEO. The pressure was building. Sophia, however, was in her own world. She was insulated from the actual business operations. She didn't see angry clients or falling sales numbers. She saw a workforce that was, in her mind, finally engaging with her ideas. She was so proud of the informational pamphlet she had created. She printed out 100 copies on expensive glossy paper. The cover read, "Pronouns are powerful, a guide to respectful identity in our workplace." Inside, it had charts and lists. It explained what Z/Zyre meant. It had a section on noun self pronouns like Burger/Burger self. She had even included a little note about Tate's contribution. For example, it read, "A colleague who uses honk/honks may be expressing an identity that is playful and unique. The correct way to refer to this person would be, Honk is working on the report, and Honk's hat is on Honk's desk." She handed a copy to every single employee personally. When she gave Tate his, he just looked at it, gave her his usual quiet nod, and used it as a coaster for his coffee mug. The situation was now unsustainable. The company was actively confusing its own clients. Internal work was grinding to a halt due to communication breakdowns, and the HR manager was spending her time writing fan fiction about our made-up identities. Something had to give. The final straw came, as it often does, in the form of a single email. The CEO needed a summary of the quarterly performance reports from all department heads for a big board meeting. It was a high-stakes request. Sophia, as a department head, had to send him her HR report. But she was now so deep in her own system that she was incapable of writing a normal professional document. We didn't see the email she sent, but we heard about it later. Apparently, she tried to write the report while adhering to her own strict rules. She referred to employees not by name, but by their pronouns. The CEO received a document that was supposed to be a serious financial and performance overview. Instead, he got sentences like, "His Majesty's sales department exceeded their targets, but we are seeing some challenges in the department run by Dollar, as Bills has reported a dip in morale. We are also waiting on a key report from Honk, and I have asked Void to assist Honk with Void Self's data collection." The CEO, a no-nonsense guy who flew in from the corporate headquarters maybe once a month, had no context for any of this. He must have thought the company's entire server had been compromised by a virus that replaced names with gibberish. He tried to call Sophia for an explanation, but she was in a Mindful Meditation for Workplace Allies webinar and didn't answer. So he did the next best thing. He got on a plane. The next morning, he walked into the office. The CEO was a tall, imposing man who radiated an aura of, "I don't have time for this." His presence alone was enough to make the entire office go silent. He walked straight past Sophia's office and into his own, closing the door with a firm click. A minute later, his assistant came out. She walked over to Sophia's office. Then she came to my desk. "The CEO wants to see you." My heart jumped. Then she went to Demir's desk. "He wants to see you too." The three of us, Sophia, Demir, and I, were summoned. We walked into his office. The air was ice cold. The CEO was sitting behind his huge desk. He had Sophia's printed report in his hand, and he was looking at it like it was a dead fish. He didn't ask us to sit down. He looked at Sophia. "Explain this," he said, holding up the report. "Right now." Sophia launched into her pre-rehearsed speech. She started talking about inclusivity, psychological safety, and industry best practices. The CEO held up a hand. "Stop." The word cut through her speech like a knife. "I don't care about buzzwords," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "I care about this company's performance. I have received 3 separate angry calls from major clients this week. I have a report here that is functionally illiterate. And I have a sales manager telling me his team is about to lose the biggest account we have because they are being forced to send out manifestos instead of quotes." "What is going on in this office?" Sophia looked flustered. This was not a friendly audience she could win over with jargon. This was a boss demanding results. She tried to defend herself. "I implemented a standard HR policy to ensure all employees feel respected in their identities." The CEO interrupted her again. "Respected? I walked through that office just now. Nobody looks respected. They look terrified to speak. The only sound is keyboards. It's like a morgue out there." He then turned his eyes to me and Demir. "And you two. Your names are on every weird email I've been forwarded. Z/Zir, Vo/Void. What is that?" This was the moment of truth. Demir spoke up before I could. His voice was calm and professional. "Sir, we were instructed by the head of human resources that the pronoun policy was mandatory. We complied with the policy as written." The CEO stared at him. "You chose Ze/Zir?" "I chose to comply with the mandatory policy, sir," Demir repeated, without a hint of sarcasm. The simplicity of it was devastating. We weren't rebels. We were obedient employees. The CEO looked back at Sophia. He saw it. He finally understood the whole picture. He saw that she had created a rule so rigid and so absolute that she had lost all control over it. She looked at us with a look of pure betrayal. She probably expected us to get fired. Instead, we had just shown the CEO that we were simply following her orders. The CEO leaned back in his chair. He put the nonsensical report down on his desk. "Sophia," he said, and his voice was weary now, like a disappointed father. "You have created a massive, expensive, and embarrassing problem. Your one job is to manage our people, and you have managed to alienate every single one of them, while simultaneously damaging our client relationships." He took a deep breath. "Effective immediately, the email signature policy is revoked, completely. I want every signature in this company to have a name, a title, and a phone number." "Nothing else? Is that understood?" We all nodded. "Second," he continued, looking at Sophia, "you will send out a company-wide email apologizing for the confusion and the disruption this policy has caused. You will state that it was a failed experiment and that we are returning to our normal professional standards." He paused. "And you will CC me on that email." He looked at me and Demir. "You two, get back to work." We turned and walked out of the office. We didn't look at each other until we were back at our desks. Then we shared a small, almost invisible nod of victory. The email from Sophia arrived an hour later. It was exactly as the CEO had ordered. It was short, humbled, and humiliating. A collective sigh of relief seemed to roll through the office as people read it. One by one, the ridiculous signatures started disappearing. His Majesty became just Steve. Beep/boop went back to being Kevin. By the end of the day, it was as if the whole insane week had never happened. Sophia was broken. She lost all her authority in a single day. She stopped walking around the office. She stayed in her room with the door shut. The food for thought sessions were quietly canceled. She didn't get fired, which was almost worse for her. She had to keep working in the very office where she had been so completely and thoroughly defeated. A week later, a new industrial-sized coffee machine appeared in the break room, the old kind. And on Friday afternoon, a delivery guy showed up with a massive stack of pizzas. An email had gone out from the CEO's office. Pizzas in the break room, happy Friday. The whole office gathered. The laughter and chatter came back, louder than it had been in months. It felt like we had taken our home back. I saw Tate standing by the window, eating a slice of pepperoni. I walked over. He looked at me and gave me his little nod. I just smiled and said, "Honk." A tiny smile appeared on his face. He just nodded again and went back to his pizza. Everything was back to normal. We had won.